Well, please remain in 2 Timothy, or excuse me, 1 Timothy, if you're already there from just a moment ago as Pastor is reading through this passage. I thought we'd start there since we're already here. And then in a moment, we're going to jump over to 1 Thessalonians, as you'll see there on the slide in your bulletin, and we'll see the alternate text for what we're going to be looking at tonight. But 1 Timothy 2, and let's read verses 1 and 2 again. We just read this. It says, I exhort therefore that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we, and watch this, what's the reason? That we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. And so, well, and then let's read 1 Thessalonians as well. I think we should just do that here in a moment too. 1 Thessalonians 4. So Pastor was preaching from these verses just this morning. And verses that we're going to be focusing on are verses 9 through 12. 1 Thessalonians 4, 9 through 12. It says, But as touching brotherly love, ye need not that I write unto you, for ye yourselves are taught of God to love one another. And indeed, you do it toward all the brethren, which are in all Macedonia. But we beseech you, brethren, that ye increase more and more, and that ye study to be quiet. See that? You study to be quiet, and to do your own business, and to work with your own hands, as we commanded you, that ye may walk honestly, and toward them that are without, and that ye may have lack of nothing. So those two verses that we just read both reference the same thought, which is living quietly, to live quietly. And that really stood out to me as I was asked to preach tonight, and Pastor had shared with me where he was preaching from in the morning messages, and also our theme on prayer and what we're doing in prayer. And I noticed these overlapping thoughts. And to be honest, I really didn't have a good answer to my own question, my own curiosity, which is, well, what does it mean to live quietly? That really intrigued me. Now, a little context, I as a person, and my personality, I prefer quiet over chaos. I do. In fact, it's actually, I have a legitimate excuse. It's a hereditary trait in my mom's side of the family. And my grandma Vesley was known for amongst her farm family for just walking away and being away from noise. Just see ya. And my mom remembers growing up and getting in trouble if they were even tittering as kids in the house. It was no noise. And so, and then I had kids. And wow, we talk about sanctification and spiritual steps. And so that is a personality trait of mine. I lean towards peace and quiet. I remember in California, we were having a conversation with some folks that we just met, had come visited our church in California, and they had family that lived in Silverton. And we were like, oh, really? Wow, we know exactly where that's at. And I said, so what's it like? What do you think of Oregon? And they're like, it's too quiet. And I'm just like, say it, what? Is that a thing? And of course you have to understand LA, you've got the whomp, whomp, whomp with the helicopters all the time, and you got the sirens, and you got the honking, and it's just that's normal to them, whatever. Too quiet, whatever. So, it's just, I really enjoy, so when I saw this verse, I thought, aha, there's a reason. I have a reason now, y'all need to shush. So I'm going to make a bunch of noise tonight about how we need to be quiet, so I hope I don't contradict myself. But seriously, what is quiet? I was wondering about that. And doing a little research, I learned, have you ever played quiet tennis? Has anyone ever played quiet tennis? It's tennis without the racket. Did anyone? Okay. That was for Cody. I knew he would appreciate that. But one pastor was asking his congregation in church, hey, why should we be quiet in church? And one little girl raised her hand and said, well, it's because everyone is sleeping. So I hope you're awake. We're not falling asleep. That's what we're not trying to do. But quiet is actually, when I studied and looked in the details and I studied the the verses, there's 4 or 5 of them in the New Testament. I studied the Greek. It actually just means to make noise. It's really not very deep. It's exactly what you think it means. It's to be quiet, to be undisturbed, to be sedentary. In other words, to keep one's seat. There's a lot of crossover when we were studying the winds and, the theme, peace, be still, and know that I am God. And Jesus commanded the waves and winds to be still. That's actually a shared word, to be quiet, shush, literally, calm down, sit down and be quiet. And that is the word. But I had some questions about that, because if we're learning to live a quiet life according to the scriptures, does that mean that we shouldn't speak out about things? And if so, Jesus himself was really not a good example of that. I mean, you talk about somebody who poked the bear. He spoke the truth that irritated people and caused a lot of uproar. So to be quiet doesn't mean to be shush all the time, to not speak up. There's something more to it. Also, if the writer of 1 Thessalonians, who is Paul, is expecting the people he's writing to take him serious, don't they know that everywhere he went on his missions trips, he started riots and uproars and runcuses? Actually, it's interesting, through the book of 1 Thessalonians that we were looking at, you'll see these little clues of how there's kind of this trail of debris behind him. He talks about, I think it's in chapter 1, for example, if there in 1 Thessalonians, chapter 1, if you look in verse 8, he kind of mentions this. He says, "For from you sounded out the word of the Lord, not only in Macedonia and Achaia, but also in every place your faith in God were to spread abroad, so that we need not to speak anything." So he's saying, you guys have made such an impact, and so everyone's heard about you. We don't even need to say anything. Well, that's not being very quiet. Look at verse 9. "For they themselves show of us what manner of entering in we had unto you, and how you turned to God from idols to serve the living and true God." And so there is a sense in which there was a lot of noise about these Thessalonians. So to be quiet, does it mean to literally be silent? I have a hard time just thinking that's it. Also, if it means to be agreeable and to just be compliant and to not say anything or to ruffle feathers, we have a lot of situations where someone doing the right thing had to do that. So there's something more. So as we see that here in a moment, we'll see some examples. But I want to draw your attention in the text we just read, chapter 4, 1 Thessalonians 4, verse 12, or is it 11? I want to point out another word, and Pastor brought this question up to us in church, and I was thinking about it as well. Verse 11 says, "And that ye study to be quiet." Remember they asked the question, how do you study to be quiet? And that was an interesting thought. And so the word study, does that imply that we get the book of quiet, or like he said, take the course of quiet, class of quiet? It has this idea of being eager or earnest to do something. And truly, for the most of us, if we're going to learn anything, especially, in school, we have to be earnest to do it. You have to put work into it, right? That's what study implies. But it's translated in other places. It's used in the Bible to talk about, there's a word strive. For example, in Romans 15:20, the same word is used to say this, "Yea, so have I strived to preach the gospel." So it's this idea of eager and earnest work. And this brings to mind a phrase that you all and I all hear Pastor Brown say all the time. And it's this phrase, to put forth an effort. Have you ever heard that? Put forth a real effort. Pastor Brown says that. And that's exactly what study means. I can't think of a better word to describe what Paul is saying is that phrase. To put forth a real effort to be quiet. That's what it means. We should put forth a real effort to be quiet. Now, how does being quiet require us to put so much effort? I mean, does a rock put in a lot of effort being quiet? Think about it. You're saying don't do anything and that's effort. Well, think about all the impulses that we face. If you've been a Christian for a day, you know the impulses that come over you to do things that are contrary to the scriptures, right? Think about the impulses that we face to contradict somebody, Or the impulses we face to give unasked advice. Some of us have that impulse more than others. How about the impulse to complain? I've been known to do that quite a bit. How about to talk about others? These are all impulses. And the effort is saying, no, right? That's the desire, the thought, to put forth the effort to lead a quiet life. So leading a quiet life is biblically defined as this really worthy goal, something to aspire to. And so the first thought, we're going to look at this through a series of paradoxes, a series of contradictions. And the first one is here. The first thought is this. You could think of being quiet, the quiet life, as doing instead of talking. Doing more instead of talking more. And this thought comes from the verse that we just read. You see the context. You'll see it right there in verse 11 and 12. What does it say? And that you study to be quiet and to do your own business and to work with your own hands as we commanded you. And again, over in 2 Thessalonians 3:12, Pastor read this for us this morning, so you should be familiar with this. 2 Thessalonians 3:12, it says the same thing. It says, now them that are such, meaning these people that are causing trouble, them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ that with quietness they work. See that? With quietness they work. I imagine somebody tiptoeing around the office, right? That's not the idea. The idea is that there's a certain flavor of a life that is busy about doing something instead of talking. I really hate to use my kids as illustrations all the times, but if you're a parent, you understand this. You hear the kids, they're playing, they're laughing, and you're just doing your own thing, trying to get something done, and then it gets quiet. What does that mean? It means there's something wrong going on. They're very studiously focused on something that you should probably find out what that is. I've learned. And, it could be them getting into something that they've never gotten into before, and it's mesmerizing. It's just, they just be quiet. Now, sometimes I have gone to investigate, and they're just playing with their toys. And that's like, whew. But that's not always the case. And why is that? Because when we're truly focused on something, you tend to have to use up your other resources, and you tend to not talk when you're doing. Proverbs 14:12 has this gem. Let's just turn there real quick. Proverbs 14:12. Keep your finger. Don't go far from 1 Thessalonians. Keep your finger there. But in Proverbs 14:12, we have this little nugget. I'm sorry, not 12. I meant 23. My bad. The screen is correct. Proverbs 14:23 has this little truth that says, in all labor there is profit, but the talk of the lips tendeth only to penury. And the idea of penury is the idea of poverty, and pennilessness is the idea. And so if you want to get ahead in life, you work. And if you want to get poor in life, just sit around and talk. and you've all been there. There's this stereotypical scene with, whether it's construction or whether it's whatever, and there's one guy in the trench digging, and there's four people leaning on the shovels talking about, how he could do it better. And that's the idea, is you have the sense in which you need to get busy. And as Christians, there are so many moments in our life where that principle comes into play. Whether it's responsibilities that we need to attend to or whatnot. This is not a detraction from fellowship or from checking in on people, but simply, are you getting things done that need to get done? And if not, where are our priorities? Our priorities lie on being responsible and taking care of what God has asked us to take care of, and not taking care of things that God has not asked us to take care of. So the quiet life is a life that is committed to doing more than talking. A just simple way to maybe apply this principle is to take inventory of your responsibilities. This is something that I was challenged to do, and has been immensely helpful. And I think it's certainly not unique, I don't think, to Christianity, but it is implied as stewards that we identify our roles as an individual and think, how am I doing? Am I taking care of what I need to take care of in my walk with God? Am I taking care of what I need to take care of, in my case, in my marriage with my wife? Am I taking care of with my kids because I'm a father? About your friends. What are your responsibilities towards your friends? What are your responsibilities towards your job? What are your, et cetera, et cetera. And you think about that in terms of, what is it that I'm accountable for? Because at the end of the day, when we stand before Christ, he's not going to judge us for all the things we dreamed of doing and all the things that we thought would be cool ideas, but doing what he said to do. So do more than talking. Number 2, what is this idea of quiet? How do we lead a quiet life? Well, number 2, it carries this idea of serving more than meddling. Serving more than meddling. And this is a slightly different concept, but we see it again in the context. So if you have your finger in 1 Thessalonians 4, you'll see it. It's very obvious there in the text. But to be quiet implies that we are going to serve others instead of serve others more than we will meddle in their business. You all had your finger there, and I didn't. Let's see. There it is. 1 Thessalonians 4:11, it says, and that ye study to be quiet and to do your own business. Or you could just say, another way of saying that is to mind your own business, would be the common vernacular. But it's again repeated also, 2 Thessalonians 3:11, the ones we just looked at a moment ago. And 2 Thessalonians 3:11, he says, for we, that is Paul the apostle, hears, there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busy bodies. And that's just not busy in a flattering way, but busy in an unflattering way, in a sense in which you spend more time minding others' business than our own. And I find that, as I was meditating on that and thinking about the implications of that truth, I got to wondering, well, aren't we supposed to be relational people? I mean, aren't you supposed to care for people? I was brought to mind of the verse that Jesus said to his disciples in John 13:35, this principle, he said, by this shall all men know that you're my disciples, if you have love one toward another. So it's really hard to show the world what the love of God looks like as we isolate ourselves from everyone and anyone. See, so there's a balance needed. And also the term one another or others appears 100 times in the New Testament, and 59 of those occurrences are in the specific context of a command, something that you and I, as believers in Jesus, have an obligation to do to someone else. And they have been called by Bible teachers the one another commands of Scripture. And it'd be a really neat Bible study. I think I might do that sometime with all of us. But there are 59 commands in the New Testament towards each other. So you can't say that you're doing a really good job as a Christian as you completely ignore other people. That is not the idea. In fact, some of us could stand maybe a little more interaction, stand a little more getting to know one another, stand a little more getting involved in each other's lives. But the problem that Paul was addressing was there is an issue with some going overboard in this area. And there's a sense in which their interest in others had devolved into soap opera-like meddling and busybodiness and you name it, gossip and whatnot. And my dad often taught me when I was a kid, he says, you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And 99% of the time, I was part of the problem. That's why he said it. I mean, there's only so much an 8-year-old can do, right? So it was a need to help others, but there's also a danger there. And he's just making us aware of that. So are we serving or are we meddling? Well, it comes back to this. And the first thought we looked at. What are you going to do? If there's nothing that you can do, then what are you talking? Like, what's the point? You have to make sure you understand where your part is in this. Are we serving them, or are we just meddling? Something that I was made more aware of, and the Holy Spirit kind of convicted me of this as I went through a season of just being, I felt like oversaturated with social media and news and whatnot, as I was being filled up with all this stuff that I literally know nothing I could do about it at all. And I thought, well, I'm just trying to be an informed citizen. And I wasn't an informed citizen. I was a meddling citizen. And there's a sense in which you and I need to focus on what we can do. Outside of that, we risk meddling. There's a picture there, Mr. Straight. Can you show that next picture? Okay, who knows who this is? Okay, we got a couple people. I did a couple surveys with people, and they were like, it's a llama. I'm like, yes, it's a llama. All right, who is it?
Larry and Caesar.
It's Larry and Caesar. So Larry's the guy, Caesar's the llama, and Caesar is the no drama llama. So if you've been in Salem, and you've been out and about in Salem, you'll run into this guy. He was at the bookstore when they opened over there in the mall. Like, literally had the llama in the bookstore, and I'm just like, he gets around, man. So does anyone else find it, though, just a little ironic that the No Drama Llama participates in, like, every single Salem event? No, seriously, does anyone else see that as a little ironic? So, okay, so how is he the No Drama Llama if he's in everybody's business? He's not. It's like, what in the world? So I think a much better, and I don't have a picture, okay, but I think a much better example of no drama would be our pastor. Pastor Brown is really, to me, a great example of somebody who cares about the people he's responsible for and doesn't really care what everyone else in the world thinks of him. And I really appreciate that. I hope you do too. And he's not trying to make a name for himself in a publication somewhere. What he's concerned about is what is good for us and how does he please the Lord. And he's a really good example for us in that area. I'm appreciative of that. But how are you doing in this area? You can advance the slide. He's cute and all, but we'll go on. Thank you. How are you doing in this area of serving people that you're responsible for? And if you're not responsible for them, do you really need to be in their business? Take inventory of that. The person, I believe, that is trying and aspiring to and putting forth an effort to lead the quiet life is going to take an inventory of what they can do and do all that they can for that, whatever it is. Lead a quiet life. Finally, number 3, I see the text that we looked at draws out a comparison or contrast between this idea of cooperation, and defiance. Cooperation versus defiance. Now, for this, we're going to look at 2 different verses. We're going to go to 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy. And we're going to look at chapter 2, verse 2. This is the one we looked at about prayer. And look at the emphasis of this passage. Look at these verses and look at what the point is that's trying to be conveyed. It says, I exhort, therefore, that first of all, supplications, prayers, intercessions, and giving of thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority. And I really look forward to Pastor and I teaching through that in the months to come. But the point we want to look at is this last part, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. So here's the thought. The reasoning is, pray for God's grace on those authorities in our lives so that you and I don't have to grief them. You and I don't have to get sideways about things. Because it should be in our hearts to cooperate. It should be in our hearts to submit. It should be in our hearts to do good. That should be in our hearts. Look over 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4. 1 Peter. 1 Peter 3, 1 through 4. So Peter is giving instruction to specific kind of sections of the church, you could say, departments of the church. He talks to husbands, he talks about children, he talks about bosses and servants, and now he gets to wives, and he says this. He says, likewise, ye wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, that if any obey not the word, they also may without the word be won by the conversation of the wives, while they, that is, while the husbands, behold your chaste, that's pure, conversation coupled with fear. Whose adorning, let it not be the outward adorning of plaiting the hair and of wearing a gold or a putting on of apparel, but let it be the hidden man of the heart, and that which is not corruptible, even the ornament of a, here it is, meek and quiet spirit, which is in the sight of God of great price. So there's basically 4, maybe 5 verses in the New Testament that have the word quiet. And this is all, you've looked at the 4th one, now you've seen them all pretty much. And so, again, it's this idea of quietness in the context of submission to authority. So in one sense, you have our submission, all of us, this is not a gender thing, all of us are submitted to the authorities of our government and whatnot. And in this specific context, we see the same angle, but in the context of a husband and wife relationship. And it's especially insightful because I think you have seen perhaps a marriage where it doesn't matter, husband or wife, one of them gets saved, but the other does not, or is not at all interested in that. And what happens is you've got one person in the marriage now with a whole new set of values, right? Values that the other person really didn't sign up for, to be fair, right? And now Peter is warning wives, specifically wives in that case, instead of confronting their husbands with all these new values and all these new things that they have no idea what they are, his better is to model this servanthood of Christ who saved the world through his unwavering obedience to the Father. So you think about it, it's not so much whether, who's submitting to who, but as Jesus submitted to the Father and saved the world, you have this example metric, you have this example way of reaching somebody through illustration, through living a life. And that's really a principle that we can all take away, whether your wife or husband or whoever. Are you seeking to live a life that is demonstrating the servanthood of Jesus? In other words, are you seeking to cooperate, or you could use any other word, or comply, to obey, to submit, versus looking for a chance to defy, to rebel? A really good picture of someone who balanced this cooperative spirit was Daniel. I love this. And so let's look over in Daniel 1, 8 through 10, and let's just watch this. Now, when you and I think about Daniel, I think at least, of someone who is almost like the poster child for Christian rebellion, right? Viva la resistance, Daniel, Exhibit A. He is the guy. He's the dude. He's the man. When they're giving him and I'm just being dramatic here, but when they give him the prison food, he's like flips the tray, like, nah, I'm eating this, and when they say bow down to an idol, he's like, nope, and then there's the time where they were gonna threaten to throw him in jail if he prayed, and he's like, I'm praying, right? You have all these really cool lessons of somebody who's just the defector, the rebel, and so I think what happens is, at least I got this impression in my nativeness, not getting really the whole picture of what the Bible is teaching me, this idea that Daniel was this example of somebody who took a stand, and I should be like him, and whatever little opinion I have, I should stand my ground in every little thing I believe. And man, that's really dangerous. That is not at all what Daniel is advocating. So let's see here if I can just find Daniel. Sorry about that. Well, can someone just read for me Daniel 1, verse 8, please? That'd be a lot better. Can you do that for me? Daniel 1, 8.
But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself.
So he purposed in his heart, and there it is. And when he purposed in his heart, you can just imagine a man who, I just picture Daniel doing this. He kind of sticks out his chin. Nope, I'm not doing that, right? That's kind of what I picture when I think of this idea. If he purposed in his heart, he says, no, I'm not doing that. Thank you, John. But look what it says in verse 9. Now God had brought Daniel into favor and tender love with the prince of the eunuchs. So he's giving us this little background. Now, question. Do you fall into favor and tender love with the head boss by disagreeing with every single thing they want to do? Like, this Bible is basically saying he is the pet, the teacher's pet. And further, if you look at verse 10, it says, and the prince of the eunuchs said unto Daniel, I fear my lord the king. So he's sharing with Daniel. He's saying, hey, look, this is a problem for me. And look what Daniel says. He says, I fear my lord the king with the point of your meat and your drink, for why should you see your faces worse liking than the children which are of your sort? Then shall he make me in danger of my head of the king. So he's sharing with Daniel, this is my problem. And look what Daniel wisely does in verse 11. Then said Daniel to Misar, whom the prince of the eunuchs had set over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, prove thy servants, he says. Prove thy servants. In other words, run a test. Do a test. I beseech thee 10 days, and let them give us pulse to eat and water to drink. Then let our countenances be looked upon before thee, and the countenances of the children that eat of the portion of the king's meat. And as thou seest, deal with thy servants. So where was Daniel's heart in this? As thou seest. Yeah, submission. So he's trusting the Lord to do a miracle, right? Or to demonstrate himself faithful to his commands. He's trusting in the Lord, but he's not conveying to the head dude that he's not on charge anymore. You see that? There is a desire in Daniel's heart to cooperate with this guy. He is not leading the revolution in the prison. He is not trying to start a strike. He is simply giving this man who he's earned favor an alternative option that he is willing to see God glorified in a way that Daniel himself believed God would do. And what do you know? God comes through. Because God, when God makes a command, he makes a way to obey. And so you see that in Daniel's life. And you see that all over Daniel's life. Think about how did Daniel have so much influence in the kingdoms that he served? He served multiple kings, right? He served multiple kingdoms. Did he do that by being the crotchety old guy? He did that by just being the most servant, the most gracious servant to the people that he was with. Now, you think about a man that deserved to be a little bitter about how life got him. I mean, okay, would you, not to get into the details, but would you like to go through what Daniel went through to be where he was at? I don't. I'm not signing up to be a eunuch. I'm not signing up to be taken away from my home as a little kid. I am not signing up for that at all. But here's a man who is purposed in his heart to serve God, and he is living the quiet life. He is submitting to the Lord, and he is showing us what it's like to use our influence that God has given us to glorify God in our submission. So the question I ask myself, and the question I want to ask each of you is, how are you displaying the character of Christ through your submission? Are you doing a good job of that? You know, nobody likes to take orders. It's in our spirit to be independent. And then add on top of that, we're Americans, right? No one tells us what to do. But as Christians who model Jesus, who did the will of his Father, we glorify God as we demonstrate submission, as we demonstrate servanthood, and as we demonstrate cooperation, and we seek to do what is asked of us to do outside of the very explicit commands of God not to do something. But is that your heart? So in review, what is it like to lead a quiet life? If we were just to look at the verses that we read, it doesn't mean that you're going to sit on a mountain with a little Zen pond and be by yourself, although that might be nice. It is to seek after the welfare of others. It's to work hard. And it's to submit. So how are we doing with that? Are we submitting? Are we working? Are we serving people that we're responsible to? That's where we need to start. And that's how we can live the quiet life.